Good evening and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, depending on where you are in the world. Firstly, our special welcome to our guest, Dr. or Her Excellency Dr. Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka. Special welcome to the leadership of the BMF, starting with the presidency, as well as the staff, and then also special welcome to the members of the Black Management Forum. From the inception of the BMF in 1976, we have pursued a range of projects in the service of our mission. That is to develop and foster managerial leadership, primarily among Black individuals through the creation of managerial structures, processes that reflect demographics and values of the wider society in South Africa. Consistent with this mission, we have done a fair share to contribute to the advancement of socio-economic transformation in our country. What has emerged significantly is the question of whether organizations such as the BMF are still relevant for today's youth and the future of transformation in our country. As custodians of transformation and drivers of thought leadership, we have identified that new and strong arguments have to be made that socio-economic transformation in South Africa has not been realized. While many important socio-economic and environmental problems remain intractable, a combination of increased awareness, new technology, funding, and more collaboration among corporate, civil society, government can effect the social change. To this end, we have developed a series of webinars to focus not only on the relevance of the BMF in the 21st century, but focus attention on areas where the lack of transformation is mostly left. So what we have then done, we've themed the series, which started in July and it's ending this month, the unfinished business of economic transformation. This evening, we are exploring the theme further and looking at the role of women leadership as a cornerstone of economic transformation. The focus of this webinar critically unpacks the need to imagine leadership driven by women in all spheres of societal life. This webinar seeks to shed light on the unique qualities of women leadership and advance the inclusion of women in leadership positions and decision-making processes. The BMF remains vocal on meaningful, sustainable change in the gender and racial balance of boards and leadership structures, and further advocates for measures which advance the increased representation of women, especially Black female professionals in executive leadership. Just a few opening pointers. We are accepting questions throughout the session. Please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen and ensure that we do not miss in the chats. If we are not able to respond to all your questions, we will endeavor to respond through the emails as well as our newsletters, but we'll try and address as many questions as possible. There will also be a Q&A session at the end, so there will be plenty of time to interact. But before I move on, I would want to introduce and welcome the Deputy President of the BMF, Ms. Tasmin Fredericks, to do the welcoming address and the welcoming remarks. Over to you, Tasmin.
Thank you so much, and greetings to the President, Mr. Andile Nomlala, to the leadership of the BMF board, to yourself, Atumile. I know you probably sitting on the other side of Africa or more to the north. So yes, thanks for joining us. And I think it's nice that we speckled it with some men this evening. Just to be clear, I think that the advancement of women is not to the exclusion of men. And I also would like to welcome and greet Dr. Phumzile to this auspicious occasion and thank her really for making time to be with us. All the other esteemed guests and my co-panelists this evening, I greet all of you and welcome all of you. For me, I'm more interested, Ace, in just hearing, what the chair of UN Women has to say. I think that the organization is very much aligned in terms of what the BMF is about. And I think it's very important to mention the fact that Black women face what is called triple oppression, that we are oppressed on the basis of our skin color, that we are oppressed on the basis of our gender, and then we have this growing pay or wage gap that happens for some unknown reason. For some reason, people don't value the work of women as much as they value the work of men. And I think that a lot of work needs to be done in that area through BMF specifically because of the intersection that we have as Black women in this country, because we understand that as the drivers of economy, we do more with money than women-headed households are just proven to put the family first, you find. And I mean, UN Chair will tell us more about this because they have led studies and research based papers on these issues where, specifically women led households, you'll see children in those homes going to school. You'll see the family as a collective excelling as a consequence of it. So I think it's important that, we acknowledge that. And then also just to, talk about this glass ceiling, this invisible layer, that it becomes, impenetrable for some women to break, and we also have the glass cliff, the fact that Black people are always there to wipe up the mess. And if it's a failed organization or company, you put a Black person and it's almost like you're pushing them off the cliff because you're setting them up to fail. So I think there's a lot of issues that intersect, but more importantly, we are living in a COVID environment globally. We also must acknowledge that the Black Lives Matter movement is a global one. And I think it's one that certainly did not originate in America. I think we may not have labeled it Black Lives Matter in South Africa, but we've known for a very long time, and we've led our democracy. And we're one of the, very few countries in the world that can say we come from, we've moved so far and so fast, having come from, apartheid. And even though we don't see all of our gains, and it hasn't translated into, the economic freedom that we want, more so for women than for men, we have made some progress. It wasn't all in vain, I'd like to think. So I think the COVID environment is something that we really need to sort of deliberately think about in planning on where women go, where our future as women lie, because I think that it becomes increasingly hard in an environment that's already hostile to women to excel, where you have this unprecedented virus, where the economy hasn't been stable before COVID, and certainly a bad situation becomes much worse. So for me, I think, Ace, not to take up too much time, but just to close off by saying, the agenda for the content of Africa needs to be taken into account. As South Africa, we are not, we're not in isolation. We're not an island somewhere in the West. We actually are one. And that, we need to make notable progress on the continent. And we need to accelerate the progress that Black women are making in the sphere of top sphere in government. I think that our president of the country has really led in terms of ensuring a cabinet that is reflective of more than 50% women in senior positions. So we want to see this translating into corporate. We want to see, government leading, obviously, but we want to see corporate following and also taking decisive steps and showing commitment to the emancipation of women. Black women in particular. So I think for me, those are just a few opening comments. And I would like, engagement, and I'm sure members are going to be very interested in what our speaker has to say, and there's going to be a lot of probing on what she says. So back over to you, Atkumile. Thank you.
Thank you, DP. Thanks for your words. Honestly, some of you might be asking why men are in this panel. And those that understand the UN Women, one of their key projects is the He for She campaign, where men play a role in driving the women agenda and the inclusion of women in society. But obviously, women do not need men to create space for them. But what we need to do as men is to ensure that we don't become blockages. We should not be blockages to the advancement of women agenda in corporate and in political society. But obviously, let's not stand in between what they are trying to achieve, but let's help where we can. And that's why the He for She campaign is very important. Before I continue, let me just remind those who've just joined that this is one of our series that we've been running since July. We've had Professor Lumumba in previously, and we've got a couple of series or webinars that are coming in the next few days, which I'll mention towards the end. This one tonight is very important to us, obviously, also because we felt we needed to do something that speaks to our women, but also how do we fast track the process and involvement of women in society. So that's why the topic for tonight is breaking through the glass ceiling, advancing a new wave of women leaders in Africa. So not just in South Africa, but obviously globally because of the speaker that we have tonight. It's always difficult to introduce someone who's well known. You don't know what to say, what not to include. But for me, it's, I don't know if I should call her Her Excellency or Dr. Phumzile Ngcuka or Mam Phumzile. She carries all those titles with the grace and the dignity that they deserve. And she's been very active in South Africa. She's still active globally, and she's made us very proud as South Africans, and it's someone that we look up to. But maybe I might hopefully share something that you didn't know about her, but some of the stuff that I'll be saying as protocol dictates, I would still go through the profile, but some of the stuff you already know, some you might not know. Like you all know, she's the Under Secretary General and the Executive Director of UN Women. She's the second person to occupy this role in the United Nations. And she's been running this role since 2013. She's on her second term as we speak. And from the grapevine I've heard, this is her last year in office. And hopefully we can probe her further and ask what she will be doing beyond her role. She's brought wealth of experience to the role. Firstly, having devoted a career in human rights, quality and social justice. She has worked in government, civil society, as well as the private sector. She was actively involved in the struggle to end apartheid in her home country in South Africa, which is our country. Then obviously from 2005 to 2008, she served as our deputy president of South Africa, the first female to serve in this role. And also she was very active in the role, and we knew what the deputy president does in that role, as she oversaw programs to combat poverty, as well as bring the advantages of growing the economy to the poor, with a particular focus on women. Before this, we all know she was the Minister of Minerals and Energy, and then was also the Deputy Minister of Trade and Industry in South Africa. She served in the first democratic elected parliament in 1994 when Mr. Mandela was still the president, so she's been in leadership for quite a while. Those who might not know, she was a teacher before anything else, and she has some international experience, having worked for the WCA in Geneva, and she worked in developing global programs for women. She is also the founder of the Umlambo Foundation, which supports leadership and education. And she's a long-term champion of women's rights and affiliated to several organizations globally, and they're devoted to push education, women empowerment, and gender equality. Those that don't know, she has a PhD. It's not an honorary PhD, it's a PhD that she studied from the University of Warwick in the United Kingdom. It's in education and technology. I would like at this point to invite Dr. Phumzile Ngcuka to join us and show herself. I'm sure everyone wants to see her beautiful face, and we can engage her even further.
Thank you, Akumile. I don't know what is happening. I'm not seeing my icon for the video. I don't know if it's being controlled on your side.
I will ask, can I ask if you, the admin people can open up a video? There you are.
And
we can see you now.
You can see me now?
Definitely we can see you. Welcome.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. Congratulations, BMF, for this work. Congratulations for your resilience and the continued engagement on issues that are addressing development in our country and in our continent. I'm glad to join you this evening. Afternoon for me.
And welcome. I think I did something rather rude. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Kumila Majija, for those who don't know. I'm a board member of the Black Management Forum. In my daytime, I work for Prudential Life Insurance, looking after the retail, corporate, and the group strategy for our French-speaking countries in Africa. I'm highly active in South Africa as well as in the continent, and I'm happy to be and privileged to be hosting this session. I think before we get into the thick of things, we're going to do things a bit different this evening. Rather than to have a whole prepared keynote speech, we would do make it more interactive, asking a couple of questions, probing questions, and then hopefully whilst the executive director is responding, you can dot some of the questions that you want to follow up on, and the admin team will bring those to my attention, and I can ask those questions. And if there are questions related to the BMF or the role of the BMF in driving women economic transformation issues, we've got the Deputy President on standby. She happens to also chair the Women's Desk within the organization, so she'll be on standby to respond to specific issues of the BMF. I think that the topic this evening is very important, and I'm hoping that we will all be able to engage and ask as many questions as possible. But I think just as a reminder for those who've just joined again, is the topic is breaking through the glass ceiling, advancing a new wave of women leaders in Africa. Women account for about 70% of the global expenditure, as probably 70% of the population in the world, and only 15% of them play an active role in our economies. Gender disparity remains an issue in South Africa and the world at large, despite the fact that a countless number of women in the workplace embody the skills, the business know-how that make them powerhouses in their respective industries. We have legislations in place to promote and harness gender parity in the workplace, but it seems to this day that all these efforts have not produced the results expected. According to a report by the Business Women's Association of South Africa, 22% of the board directors are women, but only 7% are executive directors. The Black Women CEO states that almost 50% of the qualified Black women report being overlooked for promotions. Research suggests that we must change the lens through which senior management assess leadership potential. Senior leaders who are often white men tend to select, groom, and promote individuals who remind them of themselves. Therefore, the unconscious bias blinds them to the prospective leaders of other backgrounds. While changing the system is great, we cannot wait for others to change their opinion of us, or at least the ladies. The discussion that we will have will unpack the lack of female representation on boards and look at ways we can encourage gender and race diversity in all the boards, in governance, and in leadership. We are extremely, as the BMF, vocal on meaningful, sustainable change in gender balance of boards and leadership. And we advocate for measures to advance the increased representation of women, especially Black females in the executive leadership. Now, turning over to our keynote speaker. I think we can never underestimate the role of women as a cornerstone for economic transformation. One of the first questions we'd like to ask Dr. Phumzile is, where do we stand in South Africa and globally as far as the role of women in driving economic transformation? Are things where they need to be? Do we need to change anything, if any? What have you seen in other places that could work and help advance this agenda in South Africa?
Thank you very much for the question. South Africa is a mixed bag, let me put it that way. But let me start by saying that this year, in 2020, we are marking the 25 years since the adoption of the Beijing Declaration, where for the first time, the countries of the world agreed that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And in attendance, there were 189 nations. Before that, in the world, there wasn't a common platform and standards to address gender equality. Individual countries recognize the equality of women, but there was nothing that was a global convention that was binding countries to work together towards dismantling the many barriers that you have on gender equality. As a result, it was common, and still is to some extent, to have countries actually having legislation that actively discriminates against women. And that was not, there was nothing women could do. There was no way of challenging such legislation. Most of that legislation that discriminated against women affected women's possibility to be economically empowerment, because it was a legislation about ownership of assets, It is legislation that institutionalized unequal pay, legislation that has to do with inheritance, family law that gives priority to men, and of course, for women in the formal sector, even legislation that almost the ILO calls it the legislation that punish women for having children. Because when women have children, the structure of their income changes. And for every child a woman have in most parts of the world, the women's income, overall income is eroded, so that at the end of their lives, they are much worse off than their male counterpart. But for men, they gain as a result of having a child, because it is seen, the man is a breadwinner. This is seen as a contribution towards the family, and it is taken for granted that the man will look after the children. Hello. Now, if you think about the maintenance court, you don't see a queue of men coming to claim maintenance for their children. So to pay men more in order to support children is a fallacy. So that's how our economies were structured, and that's how the discrimination between men and women has gone in from generation to generation. And for me, I'm sorry I'm taking time on this, but BMF, you are managers, some of you are in HR, you have to dismantle this, because this is one of the most formidable ways of discriminating against women and perpetuating inequality. In South Africa, many of these laws have been challenged because of our constitution. But practice in many companies and private sectors still continue to perpetuate this. For instance, we have laws on unequal pay, but South Africa has not achieved pay equality. We have a 23% gap on average of pay between men and women. We also have laws that encourage, as you know, participation and presentation of women in decision-making body in the private and public sector. We have not reached parity. We have parity in parliament, we have it in cabinet, but we don't have it in the private sector. So we need BMF also for that reason. But also, we have seen globally that 25% of boards on average are occupied by women. South Africa has a number that is a little bit less than that. So we have a gap to cover as far as women's participation in decision-making in the private sector is concerned. And when it comes to CEOs who are even thinner. And we call the year 2020 a year to break away from the quota syndrome, because on average in the world, 75% of legislators on global average are men. So all the laws that govern us in the world are made by men. But in South Africa, we're a little bit better, hoping that women carry their full percentage and contribute at the level at which they are represented. When it comes to peacemaking in the area in which I work, only 6% of people who negotiate peace are women. And they tend to settle the military disputes with spending more money on buying guns, and peace never actually arrive as a result of that. So yeah, we have made progress, but there's an illusion of progress that is much bigger than what we've actually achieved. So we still have a lot of work to do.
Thanks, Mamu Pumzile. I'm getting a lot of questions coming through. I hope you have enough time for us. You make mention of policies, which leads me nicely to my next question. A lot of policies are in place, specifically focusing on the issue of women participation on issues of economic transformation. I think the first question I would have is relating to this. Should there be policies that are speaking specifically to women? Should it not be assumed that when we put policies on economic transformation, then it's assumed that women are taken into account? Are we really in 2020 that far behind when it comes to assuming that we are seen as one?
You need policies, Akumile. And even more, you need to enforce those policies so that they are meaningful and they have an impact. And the fact that despite having policies, we still haven't moved as far as we were hoping we would have moved by now. Can you imagine if there weren't policies at all? In the world right now, countries that have had the highest representation and participation of women are countries that have targets or quotas. In some cases, for instance, countries have had quotas and removed them. And as soon as they remove the quotas, the participation of women just goes all the way south. So you actually need this so that women have got recourse. You also have seen since 1995, since the Beijing Declaration, 131 countries have passed legislation that facilitates gender equality in one way or the other. 25 countries have amended constitution to facilitate gender equality, but this is where we are. We still have not achieved gender equality. Not a single country in the world has achieved gender equality. One of the countries that ticks most of the boxes when it comes to gender equality, in fact, the country that ticks most of the boxes is Iceland. They do better on gender equality, but they don't have equal pay. They also have a problem of violence against women. 1 in 3 women in Iceland, just like in other countries of the world that have not evolved like Iceland, also have a high rate of violence against women. But it helps to have legislation because you are able to use the legislation to fight for women. You are able to have advocates for gender equality, to have something that they can hold up against those who violate them. You know, laws will not make a racist or a sexist to respect you, but laws can mitigate against a racist doing so with impunity. So that's the role that the laws play.
And if I were to ask from a South African context, how should these policies, these economic policies look like? What should they contain? And expand that beyond just policy from a government point of view, but in a corporate sphere. How do we've got policies on diversity and everything and inclusion, but then if we really want to address the issue, we need to be very specific. And maybe you would have seen from your works specific issues that come up in those policies.
Yeah, you know, you need a combination of laws from government, parliament, etc. But we also need to deal with the norms, because sometimes good laws are affected by the norms and cultural practices that work against the laws. So you need to mobilize the change in norms. And the campaign you mentioned, He for She, is one of the campaigns that we have for changing the norms, for engaging men and behavior change, so that the laws find fertile ground. Because without the changing of the norms, those who are against the behavior that the laws are trying to change will continue with business as usual, and the impact of the laws would not be felt. Working with institutions such as the churches, for instance, which is very influential about people's value system. In some countries, the traditional authorities are an important ally or detractor. And at this point in UN Women, we have actually formed a Pan-African organization of traditional leaders. And it is that organization that is helping us to do better on stopping, for instance, early marriage, because they actively in their community work against the early marriage and taking girls away from school in order to marry them off. They are passing bylaws in the areas under their jurisdiction in order to make child marriage illegal. Without those pressures and the buy-in of these institutions, laws tend not to work that well. We need to try and get to that point also when it comes, for instance, to violence against women. Because in many ways, there is a tolerance for violence against women. In our countries, we have the laws, but you know that there is an attitude, even sadly amongst women, that it is sometimes okay for a man to beat up a woman. This is something that we have to fight as a value system, as a norm, but also have the laws that effectively punish perpetrators for the abuse of women.
I'm getting interesting questions. I'm trying to choose which ones. I've got a question, and maybe
you must also help me to answer.
Okay, I'll get Tasmin to answer when she can, and another board member of the BMF can also assist. The question now is around GBV as well as and around policy changes. So from Unozizwe Somgesi, the question is, how do we go about addressing the issue of GBV and influence policy changes? Because it feels like something put under the carpet. Now there's human trafficking, which also affects our children. How do we deal with such issues?
Again, in South Africa, we have the policies. We, however, have the people that are supposed to implement these policies who are, in some cases, not convinced about these policies. You therefore need very strong leadership in order to force compliance. You should not give discretion to a station commander to decide whether a case of violence against women is legitimate or not. I mean, we have heard of many stories where a woman goes to report a case of domestic violence, and she is being persuaded by the police to drop the case. And sadly, in many cases, they actually succeed to have the women drop the case. Women feel intimidated, unsupported, and in some cases, victimized for that. So this is not something that has to do with the law. It's something that also needs us as society to engage with these institutions, to be in solidarity with the people who experience violence against women, so that the people who are responsible for making the laws work in the favor of women know that if women will not get the kind of treatment they need to get from the authorities, there is community that will take on the issue and stand with them. I really cannot emphasize enough how important it is to make some of these issues that engage the whole of community, not just to depend on the authorities.
I'm moving out to some questions from the chat. Some people are not using the Q&A functionality. Guys, please stick to the guidelines. So I think this also follows up. So the question is, 75% of lawmakers tend to be men. Does that mean we need to have more women legislatures before things will change?
Well, it would help because clearly men do not have the absolute wisdom. I'm sorry. And also it does not mean that men are there because they are experts in the areas in which they legislate. They are there because they are men. because historically it's been easier for men to be in positions of authority. Women also sometimes also defer to men, and that is why even in elections, women are the majority of voters, but you still find that men become those in most parts of the world. Men are the ones that are the majority of those who are women. So inclusion, just like you are fighting for inclusion as BMF in the private sector, you want Black people to be included. You also know what it is like to be excluded. Put yourself in the shoes of women. It's exactly the same principle. Inclusion and diversity always tends to things work better for women. Men are much more comfortable, obviously, with people who look like them. But we cannot have a situation where just one group in society dominates lawmaking.
Let me give you a bit of a break whilst you gather your strength and energy. There's a question to Tasmin, the Deputy President of the BMF. I don't know if you can have your camera on, but the question is, 44 years later, as the BMF, what are you doing to ensure that women have a role within the BMF, but also within corporate South Africa? And how is BMF paving the way for women to have an active role in society?
Thank you, Atomile, for the question. I think it's very valid. And I think, it goes back to what Mepumzile was saying about, making it not about the lawmakers, making it about saying, so BMF has a large membership, but we do drive a women agenda because we understand that we need to be deliberate about it. It's not an accident that you find queues of women at maintenance court. So there's this whole disenfranchisement is linked to the fact that women are not economically emancipated, that we rely heavily on being paid more, which we are not. We rely heavily on having skills that go beyond the usual call of duty. So I think a part of the efforts of the BMF is then how do we make, and this is not saying women are not better, but just give women the kind of confidence that makes them put their hand up, and actually we give ourselves permission largely. We must understand that women should have their own agency. We do have our own agency, by the way. We don't need permission from anyone to act in a specific way. So part of that is what we have in the BMF is the Duke Women in Power program. And it specifically speaks to the kind of soft skills that you don't get at university. So if you're dealing with a guy that's doing an LLB and a woman doing an LLB, you're gonna get two graduates coming out of university with what you would assume the exact same academic skills. But for some odd reason, from a very young age, boys are encouraged more by their parents. So it's a very patriarchal society that we find ourselves in. And so as the BMF Women's Desk, we have a partnership with Duke University in particular, where we do the Duke Women in Power. And that is open only to BMF women membership. So, the inclusivity, just because it's a woman-led program, it's a deliberate action. And it's also no accident. I mean, why do we not have International Men's Day? And why don't we have National Men's Day? It's because we implicitly acknowledge that there is no need to advance men further than where they already are. Maybe not Black men in particular. I mean, it was spoken about the exclusion of Black people in general from corporate. We know how that feels. And I think it's important for Black men then to note and to say to themselves that Black women are at an even more they're even further away from the welcome mat at the door than Black men are. So definitely, what is the BMF doing? We are looking at, linking up with international organizations, with community-based organizations, with whoever there is in corporate to really, try and find ways and means of nurturing Black women talent, because I think often when the BMF goes to corporate and we say, you know, why have you not appointed a Black female candidate? Often the answer is, well, there aren't any, which is the kind of myths that the BMF busts by specifically training women in these, you know, kind of programs that speak to the kind of skill that corporate South Africa say they want. And then when they are presented with a skill, you know, there are always excuses, but it's not because we lack the talent. We want women to be more confident, and a way of doing that is by enhancing that soft skills that, you know, like I said, we find ourselves in a patriarchal society where from a sort of like a cultural perspective, women are held back and, you know, told, you know, a woman must know her place. And it's usually in the kitchen, barefoot and pregnant type of situation. I mean, that's a narrative that's been written for us. And now we're saying as the BMF, we are going to be writing our own stories. We're not going to be writing history. We're going to be writing her story. So yeah, thanks for the question, Ace. I hope I've covered it. But of course, we've got a national footprint, and provincially we have a presence. So anybody, you know, on this webinar can make contact with us at the national office, and we can direct them in, you know, where they need to touch base on to you know, to really feel the impact of the BMF.
Thank you, DP. The next one is not really a question, but it's a comment from Ms. Glenda Perumal. She says, thank you, Leadership Phumzile, for the outstanding work that you're doing on the African continent. I still have hope that you will come back and lead our beautiful country as the president one day. That keeps coming up from time to time. It's a tall order, and I'm sure you're more than capable. Thank you. And then the next question is, okay, then I've been asked, there's a burning question coming from Miss Ivue Hwai, and I think the administrators will bring it to the fore, and she'll ask her question directly herself. Is Ivue around?
We are not able to connect her at the moment. I see she's also submitted the question via the chat section.
So let me then ask the question on her behalf. Wait. Okay, so the question is, are there ways in which we hold ourselves back as women sometimes in the workplace? For example, the fear that we are not ready for certain roles and positions, or the infamous imposter syndrome. Have you picked this up in your role leading UN Women? Does it differ in African countries or cultures?
Yes, indeed. Women tend to almost, I mean, I would say hold themselves to a much higher standard even when it is not necessary. Of course, we don't like mediocrity. But for instance, the general joke is that when a man gets a job advert, and there are 10 key areas that he needs to satisfy to be compliant for the job. If he satisfies 5, he will say, I will forge the other 5. A woman will get the same information, and if she meets 7, she says, oh, there is no way I can go if I cannot do something about the 3. So you already eliminate yourself in the competition. But also the issue of unequal pay. When you move from job to job and people ask for your salary history as a woman, you'll bring in a salary slip which is already reflecting a history of being underpaid. And they will look at where you were in your last employment and gauge you at that level and perpetuate the under-rewarding of women. And we have found that when companies do not ask for a salary history, and they interview both men and women. Women are just judged on the basis of what they provide in the interview. And in many cases, they end up being paid much better and covering the gap and the history of underpayment. And I guess my message to BMF, those of you who make those decisions, don't ask for a salary history, because you risk inheriting entrenched discrimination that the women will come with from wherever she is coming from. And you will also privilege the men because of the history of the privilege that patriarchy spends. Just decide for yourself what this job is, how this job is rated, and just pay according to that without wanting to start the woman from where she was in her last job. So yes, if you leave it to women, the chances are that women are going to be very modest.
And I think there's a follow-up question. I think it kind of links to the previous one. It's also around women participation and the role that women play themselves in advancing the issue. There's a question from Miss Mdinzi, Nonkombozo Mdinzi. She's saying, as indicated earlier, only a few women have managed to break the glass ceiling. What advice can you provide to women who currently occupy those executive positions to ensure that the number of women in leadership positions increases? And I think this goes beyond just women, but also Black executives. Some tend to think that the cake is not big enough to accommodate another person. So what advice can you give to people who are already in those positions to make room for others?
Yeah, well, you know, for both Black people and women, we still have a struggle to win. So we have an obligation to lift as we climb wherever we are. I think there definitely is a special place in hell for Black people and women who close other Black people and women out once they are in positions of authority. It is important to make sure that we all use our positions of authority to support those of our community who are facing discrimination, and make sure that we increase the possibility of everybody to move forward. We also need to make sure that we mentor people, that we sponsor people, and that we give people feedback that encourages them to pursue these opportunities. Because sometimes you can see something in somebody that tells you that this person has a good future. This person can be in a particular position, and maybe that person is not even aware that they stand a chance. It will take those of you who are already in positions of authority to tap them and to say, go for this, and I will be behind you every step of the way. It is also a luxury and irresponsible for any one of us who are in positions of authority not to go out of our way to look for people that we can support, enrich, nurture, and push forward.
Thank you, Dr. Phumzile. A lot of these questions are related, and I think you've answered. So if I don't call out your question, please do not feel offended. I think they've been responded to. I think I want to take some questions and recognize some men in the platform. Okay, there's other. Okay, some are already jumping the ship, so I will try ask those at the end. From Duncan and Miss Mnisi. His question is, has Dr. Phumzile come across best practices of enforcement of inclusion of women in all productive spheres of society, especially in the African continent?
Yes, the formal and informal networks. the different organizations that we form, be they professional associations, the likes of BMF, exist in different parts of the world. They exist also in Africa. And these networks play a very big role in helping career advancement of women, as well as of Black people. I see also here in the US, that plays a very big role. So one thing I would like to say is that it is very important to be a member of something. No one can advance as well as contribute if they don't make the time to be part of something where they can both contribute as well as benefit. This is something also that we should encourage our children to embrace from school level. Be a member of a team. I mean, even if you can be just join the group of people who can't sing, but be in a part of a community of practice of some sort, because you get some of the tips and some of the learning that you don't get at school or in your MBA class. You learn also by just observing how other people carry themselves, how they negotiate, how they win their battles. For those who are in strategic position, it is important for them to encourage people in the spaces that they have influence over. Encourage your team to get together on issues of common interest so that they can be of support to each other. So you definitely need to organize, as one of the trade union slogan used to say, organize or starve.
That's true. I want to acknowledge there's two hands that have been raised that they want to ask questions directly themselves. We've got Ms. Bongile Boy. I don't know if you can come through and ask your question.
Ms. Boy has responded that she has received the answer already as well.
Okay, thank you. The second hand we've got Johannes Notana. Please unmute and show yourself. Please go ahead.
Hello?
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you very much to the former Deputy President, Honorable Nguga. Honorable Nguga, I just have a few questions actually for you. Firstly, the current political landscape in South Africa, especially in the African National Congress, is riddled with what we call slates, right? And as far as I can realize, I think you are part with the the previous comrades during the former president's tenure. You would be the only candidates who are actually neutral, who don't have a left or a side wing. So my question is, what is or would you be willing to enter the South African politics once again, within the African National Congress, after obviously your position within the UN? And also, what are your thoughts actually, or your opinion within the current contemporary issues in the South African politics? Thank you.
Akumile, do you want to answer that one?
So luckily in South Africa now you might be able to stand on your own independently without a political party. So I think I have a similar question. Without limiting to the ANC, but then the political involvement, be it in public office or behind the scenes, but still contributing positively to the society.
Yeah, Manuel, let me say that obviously the state of the ANC right now is concerning. And I think whether you are a member or not a member, and I think for most people who are in the BMF, you have an interest in an ANC that is stronger, an ANC that is without corruption, an ANC that is able to address the needs of the country. People, poor people in particular, desperately need an ANC that can and function and serve their interests. So I count myself as one of the people who will do whatever I can, formally and informally, to support an ANC that is, cleansing itself. But obviously, the larger population is important also to enable that process. Would I step in and stand for an elected office position? That is not my preference, frankly, at this point in time. I do want to contribute, and I just don't want to work with the ANC. I'm willing at this point, my desperation level, to work with anyone who makes the country work and who is doing it for the right reason. And sometimes in order to do that, it helps if you are independent and you are not a partisan. But I mean, I have not thought about this very deeply. And right now, I'm just willing to support the ANC so that it can be better, but also not do that in such a way that I am unable to work with any other person who is doing something about helping the country find itself. I sometimes feel that maybe I'm post-party. I don't know if there's something like that. But right now, I just want to see our country work.
That's very beautiful. I think the sentiment is there from the comments and the questions that are coming up. There's comments, just to take some few. Mampumzile, we are ready for women-led organization. Please, Pagama. Others are asking, what is your plan beyond the UN? And it's around also being politically involved and stuff like that. So I think there's a cry out there to say, we as women want to be led by a woman, and let's have our own organization that's women-focused. And I think some of these comments are very valid. And hopefully, as part of your pondering and thinking, you will think about such things. I'm glad. There's a question from Ms. Unati Magida. Firstly, she wants to thank you for sharing your time and insights with us. But then now the question is, and I think this keeps on coming, there's a common theme about women who are already in positions of power, bringing down other women in positions. There's the sentiments around women not willing to mentor other women in corporate, and which is a shame, because then it's also difficult for women to find a male mentor, lest the male mentor takes advantage of the relationship. So now the question is, how do we build a new caliber of new leaders from our girl children who seem to have lost their moral fiber due to poverty, desperation, and lack of role models, e.g. the negative role of the media on their psyche?
Yeah, firstly, let me just say, yes, I know that sometimes women don't support women, but my experience is that the overwhelming number of women do support other women. Women who are in positions of authority do encourage young people in their communities, in their families, to be achievers like them. But we actually need to do this in a systematic way. We actually need organizations like BMF also even to give women who are in leadership tips on how to mentor, to coach, and to support other people, and that goes for the men as well. How can you support basically your junior colleagues from the disadvantaged communities, men, black people in general? I think that once we create a platform that makes it easy for people to venture and play this role of being a mentor. If they know that there's somewhere where they will get the support to be a mentoring leader, we are likely to get more people coming in front. So, I mean, I want to put this as a challenge to BMF if it's not happening already, that it really would be a good thing for BMF to do that. In fact, tomorrow I'll be participating in a discussion with the women in Nigeria who have established a program of mentoring for women in corporates, and they are expanding this initiative beyond Nigeria, and the results are phenomenal. So there is a lot of good experience that you can draw from in order to make sure that we take this assignment as BMF. So I'm throwing a challenge out there in addition to Jerusalem.
We're taking the challenge. And obviously the challenge is to everyone in the audience as well, because I think in our all small corners, we can all play a role to make a difference. We don't need an organization to push through the agenda, and we can all fight in our own communities, in our organizations, as well as in everywhere with our friendship circles and everything else. I think they keep on pushing me back to politics beyond the women. There's a question from Mr. Mpomela Mohau. He says, good evening, Me. Politically, you served under President Mbeki, who seemed then to be getting the gender agenda correct, and he had more than 50% of his cabinet as women. What is it that he did that those that followed him are not doing? I believe where there's a will, there is a way, and he was willing to correct this, and he was getting it right. It might be a trick question.
Yeah, well, you know, actually, yes, President Mbeki got the numbers right. President Zuma did not do too badly on the numbers and representation of women, and the current president also has the numbers. I guess the big difference with President Mbeki was that he was demanding on women. He wanted delivery, he wanted accountabilities, and he did not suffer fools. So you had to know your story when you were serving him. So people, therefore, were feeling the pressure, and they knew that he could just call you anytime and demand to know about how you were doing in your portfolio. I think all of us need a scorecard of some sort, some checks and balances in order to make sure that we can even guide ourselves towards achieving something and bringing about changes in the areas we are deployed. Having not been in government with the other presidents, I don't quite know how it works right now. But I think the oversight that was exercised by Deputy President, by President Mbeki, did help and also he had ideas. So he would also call you to ask you about your work, as well as to give you ideas and guidance. And also, if in some cases you did something that was daring and you got it right, and you felt that you had your back against the wall, he had a way of assuring you that I've got your back. For me, this is one of the best lessons I learned from having President Mbeki as my principal. That I knew that, and one of my experience was the experience of the mining charter, which was leaked before it was released. And I was in trouble. Money left South Africa from the stock exchange. And of course, everybody was mad at me, my colleagues, etc. And President Mbeki just said, Ma, don't worry. I've got your back. You've done the right thing. Just stay still. Don't make any statements. The market is going to correct itself.
That's good.
And sure it did. So it's good also to know that when you have your back, and then another experience was we were working with China and many other countries on blood diamonds, and we wanted to make sure that Taiwan took responsibility for stopping blood diamonds that were traded through Taiwan. So we did not want Taiwan to fall under China for the purpose of this initiative. And China was very angry. And when China is angry at you, it can be rattling. So they went to report me to say, you know, this minister of yours, you know, she's giving Taiwan a platform, and this is not something we approve of, obviously. And I explained to him that if I let Taiwan fall under China, I will not get this thing right, because China will not have a comprehensive way of monitoring that there are no blood diamonds that are being traded under Taiwan. He said, okay, I get the gist of your story. I will stand with you. I will sort this out for you. So, yeah, so I just think that being challenged by your principal is important, being supported and being called out also when you're out of order.
That's valid. I think one of the comments we've had was how everyone was accountable, and you've just confirmed that with your statement. I don't know how you're doing. We still have time, but I don't want to over exhaust you. I know you
Yes,
still have.
yeah, okay.
What's your appetite for more questions? How many can you
take a few?
Okay, that's fine. I want to bring in Miss Bulelwa Faith Mahlaka. She's raised up a hand, and then she'll be followed by Miss Innocentia Mutau, who's also raised up a hand. So if Kulu if you can bring them through, or if they can have their cameras on and their mics.
They actually both just dropped their hands as you were mentioning their names.
Okay, that should mean that you've answered the questions. Okay, now we've got Ms. Tobela Gzeya with their hand raised. Please come through.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and good day to both you, Dr. Muka and Atumile. My question is really simple and more on the personal front in terms of your leadership peers. As a woman, the many intersectionalities that we deal with present quite a challenge to our mental health, and this can be a huge factor, specifically in my observation and in my case, as to why women don't step up in certain instances. So I'd like to understand how you handled the pressure of the environment you were in during your journey, because as a woman, I can definitely understand that the intersectionalities, the microaggressions, all of those things that you face daily, and then you had to go home and be, a family member that's fully present and go back to the office. What would be some of the nuggets of advice you'd share with women in that regard?
The pressure is definitely real. I also think that men also have their own pressures, and in some ways, the pressure to be a conqueror, that patriarchy demands from men. Women have to be performers in their workplace, but also they still have the burden of unpaid care responsibilities at home. And sometimes it just becomes too much. You really have to try to find a way of self-regulation and self-care. I think it's important to learn to say no to some of the things, and also to find people that can be your support system. Having people who are your girlfriends, who are the people that nurture you, people that you feel affirmed to be around is absolutely, absolutely important. It's also important to think that you are not there to solve all the problems that are there. So there are times when you just have to say, this I cannot do, this far I cannot go, and I must pull back. I'm not saying that I've been able to do everything. So it's not a do as I say answer, because I've also struggled with the balance of the home and work balance. I have to say the single thing that I felt that has helped me to cope better is good relations on the domestic front, is good relations in terms of the friends that I keep, and the kinds of friends you can be vulnerable to without feeling that you are going to be judged. It's important to have that circle of friends where you can have peace with them in the middle of a storm. So try and make sure that you cut off the noise. As abantu abakudinayo bayeke. Just move away from that and try and be in that space where you are able just to find some peace and calm and quiet.
Just to remind everyone, I am only focusing on the Q&A questions, not what you guys are chatting about in the chat room. There's plenty of questions in the chat and I'm losing focus. But there's one comment or question that has captured my attention, coming from Ms. Mandisa Matobela. She says there's a great work underway to empower women, but who is mentoring the men to make room at the table for all the women who are being empowered and equipped for leadership roles? Maybe that doesn't need to be answered by you. You can answer it if you feel free to answer the question.
Yeah, well, I actually think it's a valid question. I think we don't do enough of that. I think that the boards, as well as the institutions that men belong to lead, need to have a way of preparing men for an inclusive workplace. It is also something that, again, I want to come back to you, BMF. It's important discussion to have amongst yourselves.
That's true. I don't know if at this point the president wants to have a comment, Mr. Andile Nomlala. Maybe you can come through and help respond to the question. Kulu, if you can bring Andile in, yes.
Thank you, Atumil, and good evening to Dr. Phumzile. Such a pleasure to have you, and good evening to my colleagues in the BMF, and good evening to the rest of the participants. My comment, Atumile, is just to firstly start with the foreword that Dr. Phumzile actually wrote to our former president, Ms. Nolita Fakude, in her book. And I think that resembles very well to today's topic. And I quote, "The story of Nolita Fakude is a masterclass in how a young Black girl who grew up under apartheid South Africa and was raised in a small village in the Eastern Cape stood up for herself, took hold of the opportunities she identified as stepping stones, and became one of our best. Our South African liberation story was meant to give us many more stories like this one. This is a dream we cannot give up on. Nolita Fakude shows us that such dreams can come true." I close quote. I think that statement is as powerful as anything today, that the empowerment and the advancement of women must start, as it stated, must start and must exist in a democratic society that we have created. It must be the environment that enables women to be successful. It must be an environment that enables women to achieve and succeed. And if we don't create that as a society, we would forever be caught wanting on how to advance and develop women. I think the messages that Dr. Phumzile and my Deputy President have said here, for me, it's much more touching when we practicalize them. And by practicalizing them is that we need to infuse and we need to put women leadership at the forefront of many things that we do, but more at a practical level. We must not, as the same as we say about transformation, we must not remain theoretical, abstract about what we want to achieve. The President of the Republic, not so long ago, put a challenge that 40% of government contracts must be allocated to women. Now, all of us, we should be preoccupied with the mechanics and the intricacies of how to achieve that target. And if we give the responsibility, like you have seen with yourself, Dr. Nambongoka, where you come from, the influence of your successes to the top job in the UN means that some other young lady somewhere must be inspired and believe that she can also reach the greater heights you have achieved. Now, if we create a plethora in our society of phenomenal role models that are women, true empowerment, why is it that 26 years down the line, we don't have a notable, well-known Black African women billionaire? Why is it that 26 years down the line, we, for the first time today, and I must congratulate her, we have, for the first time, appointed a top-class African woman as an Auditor General. Even the BMF actually made a submission in Parliament to make sure that the lady does get recommended for the post of being an Auditor General. But why did it have to be a stringent process when she was a Deputy AG, capable, young, very visible, and well known that she had the same qualifications as anybody else? I understand the process, but I think the empowerment of women must amount to the practicalization of their development. I think the empowerment of women must amount to a society that allows them to be successful. So those are the few words that I wanted to put so far. Thank you.
Thanks, Andile. There's a comment from Ms. Lula Mambobo. She says, my view is that the divide between the private and public weakens the effort to drive towards achieving equality and women's emancipation. What is the view on a program that brings all women in management or executive positions together to address the common agenda? The public sector is not any better, if not worse. I'm in the public service, 15 years as a DDG, but the ceiling seems to be fixed permanently.
Yeah, I am tongue-tied because really in the public sector, which is the place where many of the policies that are promoting transformation come from, should be a leader when it comes into representation of women, because we are in a much stronger position to call for change in the private sector if we ourselves have our house in order. If in the private sector you still have a glass ceiling, that is definitely something that is potentially crippling across all other sectors. I guess we actually also need to have the unions also focusing on these issues of transformation, so that when unions are calling, for instance, for better wages, they must call for better and equal wages. For instance, it would be so nice to have a strike for equal pay, driven by trade unions, to have the trade unions calling for representation of women, because they do have a very important voice in this discourse. And not just in South Africa, I have found that globally, we haven't quite managed to put the unions in the driver's seat when it comes to these issues of gender equality and transformation that addresses the issues of diversity and inclusion as it relates to women. Probably a bit better when it comes into issue of race. So we need to make sure that we have a caucus position with the women in the unions to be our partners, to see the messages that would come from the organizations such as the BMF, the IWF, which are the different entities that are fighting for gender equality.
Okay, I think I would be missing an opportunity if I don't bring COVID into the conversation. And I think no one knows what will happen beyond COVID and if things will get worse or better. Yes, we are seeing changes, but we don't know the full extent of the impact. But then the question now is, do you think that COVID has given us an opportunity to drive through economic transformation for women?
Yes, and at the same time, COVID has also threatened some of the gains that we had made in a real way. There is no gender neutral pandemic. All pandemics have a gender dimension. And pandemics tend to be harsher on women. We saw that in Ebola, the same in Zika, and this pandemic is no different. To the extent that women have lost jobs and their livelihood, the situation is definitely much more complicated for women, because the majority of the women in the world who work outside the home work in the informal sector. And the fiscal stimulus, by and large, have not been targeted to women in the informal sector. This is what we're grappling with many governments around the world, calling them to have a targeted approach to women in the informal sector. Women entrepreneurs don't have insurance. I hope Atumile, your company can look into that. Women don't have insurance. Don't have insurance, don't have deep savings. So the loss is real. But also the sectors that are affected by this particular crisis, the service industry, hospitality, and tourism, women are significantly represented in those sectors. So there are a large number of people who are affected. In the research that we've just done with the UNDP, we are projecting that women who will fall into extreme poverty as a result of COVID will be many more than women, and in particular women in their mid-20s to mid-30s. And this has to do with the fact that that is the time when women are stepping into the world of work, as well as having children. So the coming together of their biological clock and childbearing age, as well as entering the labor market, tends to impact on women in a manner that is not reversible. So we are calling on government to have a particular intervention to look at how they will make sure that they mitigate the impact on this age group. And also this is in the age group that is still trainable. You can still invest in them and course correct so that they can emerge after, and this is where the opportunity comes. They can emerge after this much stronger and able to take whatever advantage, for instance, that will come with what we expect will be the exponential change that will come with the technology that will take over a lot of the sectors and drive many of the opportunities going forward. Girl children also in many countries have not gone back to school after COVID. We had made quite good progress in girls' education. In countries where child marriage is common, in South Africa, where in some parts of the countries, we stand to lose the progress that we were making in girls' education. So we need to be woke to that fact and make sure that we call on our departments of education, social work, etc., to pay attention to the dropout of girls. Girls are also trafficked at this time. The risk is real for them. And COVID opens that opportunity because people who are abusive of women, who traffic girls, they always take advantage of a crisis. Yeah, so it is quite concerning, but it is also an opportunity for us because this has been made visible. All of these problems have been made visible by the crisis. So we know that these problems exist. We should be much more focused on addressing them.
Thank you, Ma'am Phumzile, Her Excellency, Dr. Phumzile. Because we are a professional organization, we need to stick to time. And we had asked for an hour and a half of your time and everyone's time. So what I would ask Andile, as part of his closing remarks, to also respond to a question that has been posed to him. What is the views of the BMF leadership on the BMF's role and its effectiveness in lobbying government and corporate, firstly to keep transformation on the forefront, as well as the women's upward trajectory, particularly in the private sector? So as you wrap up, Andile, and you do your closing remarks, please also please respond to the question at the same time.
Thank you, Akumile. Thanks once again to the participants and to Dr. Phumzile. Maybe let me start by just passing one comment also and then respond to the question and then thank the speakers to close. I also want to refer to one other quote that was a speech made by one of the former US presidents in 1965 when he referred to liberties of freedom. I quote, "But freedom is not enough. You do not wipe away the scars of centuries by saying, now you are free to go where you want and do as you desire and choose the leaders you please. You do not take a person who for years has been hobbled by chains and liberate him, bring him up to the starting line of a race and then say, you are free to compete with all the others and still justly believe that you have been completely fair. Thus, it is not enough just to open the gates of opportunity. All our citizens must have the ability to walk through those gates," close quote. It's never enough, Atumile, to give the freedoms that we currently enjoy without making sure that the people that are being liberated are directly benefiting from them, without putting the necessary mechanisms to make sure that they are benefiting. There's one thing that I want to comment about that touches my heart, and I think somebody had asked a question about it here, that the level of gender-based violence in our country is actually, I was chatting to someone just yesterday, it's actually quite perplexing because I think our societal, the level of consciousness of Black men, including myself in this context, is actually getting dissipated on a daily basis. I think the moral fiber of us as Black men is completely getting divorced from our forefathers and our forebears and our fathers. And the worrying factor is which type and where are we being bred? Where do we come from? What type of men have we resurrected from? Because it's un-African, it's uncultured, it's not Ubuntu to find a man in our entire history as Africans that brutalized and literally take a life of a person. The level of entitlement, when you listen to the stories of the criminality and the murderous nature that we take towards our women is quite worrying. And I think somebody raised the question of there is much development, even though it hasn't reached the necessary levels, but who is focusing on creating a new breed of men that can know that women are not their punchbags? Who is focusing? Because we're living in a society where there are no father figures. And even back in the days when there were no father figures, the responsibility of a community and the fathers, the uncles that were there was enough to father a child. But the level of anger, the level of disorientation of men in how to treat and look after women is quite concerning. And I don't know when we would have that discussion where only the focus can be on the psyche and the psychological composition of men. Because everywhere you go, when you talk about abuse in the broader context, whether it's physical, psychological, mentally, or otherwise, men, one way or the other, are implicated. What type of society that is grappling with the basic thing of treating each other like humans would be able to monitor and harbor a society that can develop a girl child to succeed and achieve their own goals and prosperity in life? It's a question that hobbles me. In the BMF, Atumile, just to respond to the question, I think in the beginning of our term, you would notice that we had a lot to engage about, particularly in the reversal of transformation in state-owned enterprises with the appointments of white male CEOs. And I think Dr. Phumzile would remember during their time as the second and the third administration in our country, they had managed to create and develop a solid fiber of top-class Black professionals who mended these state-owned enterprises exceptionally well and created luminaries of the likes of Gloria Sorobe, Montle Nhlahla, and Nolita Fakudes, and others. You fast forward to the fourth and the fifth administration, there hasn't been a concentrated outlook of a notable figure of top Black professionals, the likes of Wendulu Habe that were developed back then. There are women in this group, the likes of Nati Makita, Azola, Zinzim Kolodel, I saw them. But they don't have the same platform and the backing that was there back then. And we remember the fingers of the past leadership politically was also felt in the private sector. It was not left to the private sector to do and drive transformation and the development of women. It was never left to them. That's why we created the number of top-class Black professionals, African women, Cindy Zilwa, Nonkululeko Gobodo, and others. But you fast forward, an entire generation has been missed from being the second layer leadership of women that comes to the fore. And hence we had a serious backlash with government when they made appointments. And in some instances, it was sad cases where the entire board, I remember having a meeting at the Dinel board, And I asked the question, I was across Mayor Gloria Sarobe, Mayor Montlatlatra, and asked them that how is it possible that you could get to a conclusion of finding a white male when you know yourselves that you were given literally a chance when your names were never in the public realms? And that chance you took by both hands, and you succeeded in it because you were backed by a government system that was pro-transformation, not the illusion that we put these days of radical economic transformation that no one can describe, but it's only synonymous to looting. There were practical steps. So I think our fight at the time with government had managed to influence the likes of Mayor Mpumi Mpofu at AXA CEO, the CEO of Transnet, and others that are now females. But if we had kept quiet, we wouldn't have achieved. Private sector, Atumile and the colleagues, is the worst case scenario. I actually want to put private sector on the same pedestal as the state capture, because I find it as a very unpatriotic corporate citizenship that we have in the private sector. I find it as the people that are too comfortable to put the entire blame of our failed state, because we are at the beginning of a clearly failed state. The economic outlook tells us the story. The private sector hasn't come to the fore to actually create and contribute from their end, their side. I would use one close example, a very painful example, a Woolworths story, where Zaida Rylands has been an executive of Woolworths South Africa, who is 60% of the South African business for 20 years at Tumin. But when the time came for her to emerge as a group CEO, some excuse came to the fore. So as the BMF, we have a bigger responsibility, and will always continue to carry and fight the best way we know how. But we want to thank you, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, for your time. We really appreciate it. I have received some messages. Many of our members have enjoyed your conversation with Atumile. Atumile, thanks for firstly organizing this session. And we thank you for exposing our own African women with the formidable former deputy president. I think it doesn't get better than having a close link and a close conversation. We hope one day we'll host you at a physical event where it's possible to talk. To you, Deputy President, you are always a dependable and reliable sister to me, and I really appreciate you. Behind the scenes, we have the staff at the office. We say thank you to them for making sure that the evening goes very well. We are very pleased. And good evening to everybody. And thanks to the participants for being part of this program. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Andile. DP, if you don't mind, I'll skip you so that we can close very quickly. I would ask Mam Phumzile to have some closing remarks, a few pointers, but in your closing, sorry to guide you, please, please also touch on what we can do as an organization to assist your efforts, either in the UN Women or as well as the Mlambo Foundation. And also, one of the comments that have been being asked all the time to continue to remind me, Ace, you've forgotten this question. In your response, please also talk about how women can, or how you can encourage women to stop being modest and actually taking the plunge for asking for a pay raise or for anything that they want in the corporate sector.
Okay, thank you, Atumile. Thank you, Andile, for those very strong and constructive words. Thank you to the audience for staying this late. I have to say that BMF is one of the important organizations in our landscape in South Africa. You have been in the field for a long time. You have seen the dark days. You have had your own challenges. You have lived in an era when many organizations that are non-governmental and professional organizations have been decimated. And the fact that you are still standing is truly something to be celebrated. So you are not a startup. And you also operate in the higher echelons of our society. You operate also in business in an area that needs transformation. So you have your job cut for you. And because you are also the type of people who have a quest for change, we count on you as our foot soldiers wherever we are. I would say to women and the issue of being modest when it comes to advancing their careers, advancing themselves, it's important that women support each other to do this. Please, let's push each other. Make sure that if you see somebody that ought to be aspiring for much more than what they are aspiring for, but is not taking the space, push them. And I'm saying this not just to women, I'm saying to men as well. Let's be each other's mentors, promoters, encouragers, shoulders to lean on, brother and sister keeper. We really need to hold on together to make this push. And I think it looks difficult, as Madiba say, until you actually do it. Then you will discover the strength that you have between. So my biggest message is that please just step up. Step up and give it a try. The only thing that you can get at the level at which you are now is to fall forwards. You definitely are not going to fall backwards. And falling forward is a step forward in its own right. So just go for it. And make sure that you demand what is due to you. Negotiating a good salary is not greediness. It's not something to be shy about. It's something that you deserve. So please go for it. Otherwise, you have that bond to pay, those school fees to pay. So remember all of those responsibilities that you have. I would really ask that you please engage with my office, which is led by Anne Shongwe in South Africa. In this specifically now with this area that Andile mentioned of the 40% procurement, which the president has announced as the share that we can target for women. I think there's a lot of work that we need to do in order to support and encourage women entrepreneurs, help them to have bankable proposals, help them to engage with that. We don't have enough people in that space. That would be my one biggest request. Secondly, on sexual harassment at the workplace in the private sector, we need you to be whistleblowers. We need you to make sure that where you work as a BMF member, you have the right policy. South Africa is pushing the whole of Africa to ratify the ILO Convention of Sexual Harassment at the Workplace, which needs the endorsement of government, business, and unions. We need to see that happen in most of the countries. Please make sure that in NETLEC and in other forums that are important for this process of ratification, you are there. You make your views known, and your counterparts that you may be in touch with in other parts of the continent, please be in touch with them. Let us not allow perpetrators to be unleashed in the workplace in different parts. I actually think that men who are perpetual harassers must be outed so that your criminal history as a perpetrator has to be a reason why you don't get a job. Because once you are brought into the workplace, you become a threat to the women in that workplace. So before I get carried away and give you too much work, let me stop. and also say that in my work of supporting school principals through Umlambo Foundation, and we are also supporting teachers to migrate and learn to do blended learning and to learn to teach virtually. Those of you who have those requisite skills, we would love to work with them. Atumile is one of my right-hand young man, so he will be able to direct you to my team there in South Africa. But also we're looking for people in the private sector who can be mentors to our school principals and assist them to fortify their leadership skills. So those of you who may be willing to be a mentor to some of our principals, we would really appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mama. You are in a league of your own. That's some of the sentiments from the chat groups. Thanks for being generous with your time, and thanks to everyone who managed to join. I also need to acknowledge our sponsors in case we don't get funding again. Our anchor sponsor for all the webinars we've been running is Sanlam, but tonight specifically has been sponsored by Woolworths. So thanks so much. Just in terms of a few announcements, we've got another webinar on the 26th of October with Ms. Maria Ramos, who will be looking at digital financing, financial inclusion, and stability that works for Africans. And then we also have the last webinar as part of the series on the 30th of October with Mr. Sipo Pichana, and his will be focusing on business, government, labor, and civil society working together. So looking forward to you guys participating in those forums, and hopefully you'll be as interactive as you were tonight. If you are interested, this webinar has been recorded. It will be on our YouTube page as well as our website. So once it's up and ready, we'll send an email to everyone who has registered for this evening. Thanks for your time. Good evening, and enjoy the rest of your evenings.